Elite Facts presents
8 creepy theories behind kids' shows. 8. Care Bears. They're based on voodoo gods. Oh god, these things. So during the 1980s, the Care Bears took the world by storm with their large line of kids' toys, as well as having multiple films and television shows. Of course, kids everywhere watched this just because of how sickeningly cute they were. Care Bears just want to fill the world with love and be friends with all the children. But could they, in fact, be representations of voodoo in the United States? Probably not. However, there is a theory that holds that the name Care Bears is based on Carrefours, the district of Port-au-Prince considered to be the capital of the voodoo world. It's said that their home, the cloud city of Carolot, is an idealized representation of the holy city of the Loa, the gods of the voodoo religion. The theory goes further by drawing a string of similarities in the use of terminology in the show and in the religion. The Care Bears constantly want to share until you care, while the Loa are believed to possess the bodies of their worshippers. The Care Bears are identified as the friends of children the world over, just as the voodoo Loa are described by their followers as friendly spirits, or simply their friends. Not to mention the fact that the symbols imprinted on the Care Bears' stomachs are said to represent the signals that are commonly associated with the Loa. Who would have thought the Care Bears had an evil agenda?
7.
The Flintstones. It's the post-apocalypse in modern times. Without a doubt, one of the most classic cartoons in existence, The Flintstones was one of the most popular shows during the 1960s. The original incarnation of the show ran for 6 years and produced over 160 episodes, which at the time was really impressive for a cartoon show to last that long. But have you ever wondered why the entire society in the Flintstones is based on modern times? Well, modern times back in the 1960s anyway. The continual references to modern technology, culture, and religion are all modern day, right down to the basic family structures. I mean, how do they know what showers are and understand the concept of how cars work? Well, the first answer is that it's just a cartoon, so it can get away with stuff like that. The other answer, however, is that it's because the citizens of Bedrock are actually members of a distant future society. After a series of nuclear disasters, all of Western civilization has collapsed. Generations later, the survivors have recovered enough that they have their own society modeled on what they remember of the 20th century. Another theory is actually based on social classes, as it's believed that the futuristic Jetsons exist in the same world, and that society has become so deeply divided that one group live in an ultra-advanced society, while the others live on the fringes without any technology at all. Not to mention that the talking animals in the Flintstones are actually synthetic creations. The reason for this theory is because almost all of the real animals have been extinct for decades. None of the Flintstone characters realize how silly it is that they talk to creatures that didn't even exist alongside early humans.
6.
SpongeBob. All characters are deformed mutants. Who honestly thought SpongeBob would be as successful as it is? I mean, the show is literally about a talking sea sponge who lives in a pineapple at the bottom of the sea with a meowing pet snail and is friends with a dumb starfish who lives under a rock, a clarinet-playing squid, and a scientist squirrel from Texas. And he works in a restaurant owned by a crab. It honestly sounds like something you'd see when dropping acid. Well, needless to say, however, it was an interesting enough concept to gauge the attention of both adults and children, and is still running to this day. That being said, a Reddit user came up with the theory that the show is really about nuclear testing. SpongeBob and his friends look and act the way they do because of their exposure to the radiation from atomic bombs dropped in the area around Bikini Bottom. Again, this is another case in which you could say, it's just a kid's cartoon and you're looking into it just a little too much. And you are right for the most part, but theories like this are just too fun not to talk about. Not to mention how crazy the premise of the show is, so we figure anything is possible. First of all, the fact that a talking sponge lives in a place called Bikini Bottom isn't some roundabout reference to human contraception. The show is set under a real place called Bikini Atoll, which is confirmed by the official Nickelodeon written synopsis. Now, here comes the interesting part. Back in 1946, the US government detonated a couple of atomic bombs there, one of which was set off underwater. The resulting explosion looked exactly like the explosion used commonly on the show. Either that's a coincidence, or the creators of the show knew exactly what they were doing when writing about the world of SpongeBob.
5.
Winnie the Pooh. All characters have a mental illness. Okay, we've all made the joke about Eeyore. He's clinically depressed. Move on. Now, that being said, however, have you not noticed how the rest of the characters all have some other form of mental illness? It's been theorized by many people that the entire cast of Winnie the Pooh are actual representations of mental disorders. An article by the Canadian Medical Association diagnosed each of the central characters with a different psychological disorder. Owl is dyslexic, Piglet has generalized anxiety disorder, and Tigger has ADHD. Now, what does that leave Winnie the Pooh with? Well, it's been said that Pooh suffers from ADHD, OCD, and impulsive tendencies. Not to mention, we can't forget about the only human character of the cast, Christopher Robin. The Canadian Medical Association has diagnosed him with schizophrenia. The other characters are, after all, manifestations of his own imagination. With their myriad of mental issues, the different animals represent Christopher's own struggles as a child learning to function socially and interact with the outside world. 4. Peanuts. Charlie Brown has cancer. Okay, now we have to admit this theory is clutching at straws. However, it's still a popular theory. While most children's shows feature a certain degree of wish fulfillment and focus on happy endings, Peanuts is one of those shows that stands out as something of a downer. While fantastical things do occur, they still tend to end on a sour note. Well, as it turns out, things become even more of a downer when you realize that Charlie Brown is bald because he has cancer. We're not making this up. This is one of the more popular kids' show theories on the internet. Even worse, everything that happens in the series is the result of his overactive imagination, made more vivid either by the cancer itself or the treatment used to try and kill it. The real kicker behind this theory is that the reason nothing ever quite works out for him is because he knows that he's dying and has resigned himself to the fact that life isn't fair and he's already given up.
3.
ScoobyDoo, set during an economic depression. So judging by the style of the show itself, Scooby-Doo is without a doubt set during the good old swinging 60s. I mean, just look at the Mystery Machine, for God's sake. It's literally breathing the 1960s with its odd choice of colors, hippie-like font that says Mystery Machine, and of course the flowers that appear around the van. Not to mention the clothing choice of the main characters, and the fact that they always tend to use slang that is most commonly associated with the 1960s. But when you start to look at the stories across the series, certain patterns become clear. Everything seems to be abandoned and falling apart. Dilapidated mansions, empty hotels, ruined theme parks. Almost all of the villains are people who would normally be respected, but have fallen on hard times, including teachers, scientists, and historians. The only possible solution is that the original Scooby-Doo series is set in the midst of a horrible economic depression. This reading also drastically changes our understanding of the gang themselves. Most of us assumed that they were simply carefree hippies on the road to adventure. They all appeared to be in their late teens or early 20s, so it kind of made sense that they were off having adventures rather than getting proper jobs. Damn hippies.
2.
Ed, Edd, and Eddy are dead. Okay, Ed, Edd, and Eddy was one of Cartoon Network's original programs created back in the late 1990s that, although really simple in terms of what the show had to offer, was actually pretty good as it brought back the slapstick comedy genre for a younger generation to appreciate. It's a pretty simple, wholesome show about 3 kids who are all oddly called Edward, who just spend a lot of time trying to scam the other kids on their block. Yeah, thinking about it now, it doesn't seem so wholesome knowing that there's a bunch of kids trying to scam other kids out of their allowances on a daily basis. Trust us though, at least the premise of the show is more family-friendly than the theory is. How dark is this theory, you might ask? Oh, we don't know. How about all the characters on the show are dead? This theory proposes that all the children on the show are actually dead, and the neighborhood they live in is purgatory. For one thing, some of these kids already look like they're dead. Pretty much everyone in this neighborhood has weird skin tones or odd-colored tongues, like corpses might have. But then there's the fact that there are no adults in the show. They're mentioned, but never seen, except one time when you see Eddie's parents' arms. Yes, we did research, so you guys couldn't call us out on a theory we didn't make, so the joke's on you. The closest thing to an adult we ever see is Eddie's older brother, whom they meet the only time in the entire show's history when they actually leave their neighborhood/purgatory. However, the guy turns out to be a horrible excuse of a person, by cartoon standards anyway, meaning that it's totally feasible that they were simply visiting him in hell. This would also explain why the setting of the show is so hard to pinpoint. In one episode, the kids are seen using a typewriter, despite having been shown using a computer in another, and they seem to know what a cassette tape is, unlike most teens of the 21st century. The theory holds that this is because each one came from a different period in American history. Ralph, the weird kid with the inexplicable Eastern European accent, died in the early 1900s in a farming accident. Johnny, the one whose best friend is a plank, comes from the 1920s when owning a piece of wood with a face painted on it made you the most popular kid on the block. Jimmy, the sickly kid with yellowish skin, died of leukemia in the 2000s, and so on. So the theory itself has a lot going for it in terms of proving whether it's fact or not. However, it's just hard to believe a show like this could be so dark.
1.
Doug. Doug takes drugs to cope with the time he was sexually assaulted by Mr. Dink. As if Ed, and Eddie's theory wasn't creepy enough, this theory is more disturbing than it is creepy, as this theory is bound to send shivers down your spine. So Doug alone is a strange show. Not strange in the sense that it was crazy, but strange in terms of art style and presentation. Now, we bet you thought the theory would involve something to do with the various crazy colors used on characters, similar to the Ed, and Eddie theory. Well, no. This theory states that Doug's neighbor, Mr. Dink, was a child predator who preyed on Doug, leading to Doug taking LSD as a coping mechanism. Now, here's the imagination-stretching evidence to back those allegations. Mr. Dink always invites Doug into his home to show him some very expensive high-tech gadget. Not to mention that there's a point in the show where Dink offers Doug a chance to work in his heavily secured shed. Mr. Dink has no children, but yet he's the leader of Doug's Bluff Scout troop. And there's an episode where Doug, Skeeter, and Mr. Dink get lost while canoeing. Dink says he's going to search for camp, and when Doug and Skeeter go after him, they find him butt naked in a tree, claiming to have lost his pants. Yeah, that's kind of creepy. The LSD also makes sense, as it would explain all of Doug's hallucinations. We thought it was daydreaming, but were we actually riding the enchanted train on Doug's psychedelic journeys? There was an episode where Doug is home alone, sneaks into Judy's room, and later, while in the basement, begins hallucinating. That theory is absolute madness.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more Elite Facts.